In the realm of the good guys, the throne stands empty, for the true heir has been driven far from home by the machinations of the wicked faction. Okay, stop. No, I can't. I'm already done reading. As a setup for a political struggle involving the leadership of a fantasy kingdom, this sucks. Unfortunately, all too often, this is how fantasy politics is crafted. The result? Flat, unengaging tales where the magic overshadows the politics, monarchies are romanticized, and everything boils down to a simplistic good versus evil narrative. But fear not, today, just-in-time worlds, we're driving deep into the 5 biggest pitfalls in writing political fantasy and how you can avoid them. From the allure of fantasy sprawl to the challenge of crafting satisfying endings. Join me, Marie Mullaney, as we uncover the secrets to richer, more compelling political fantasy. Let's write better politics, one kingdom at a time. You might have heard in adventure fantasy and progression fantasy about the problem with power crawl. That is when a story starts with small stakes and minor conflicts and then ends up with world-defying threats. Characters have to level up in ridiculous way and the power level completely overshadows the story. There is a fantasy politics equivalent to this, which I have chosen to call fantasy sprawl. A story that suffers from fantasy sprawl starts small initially. There are fantasy elements that serve to enhance the political landscape. They provide a unique way to explore human nature and societal dynamics. But the emphasis of the narrative is on the political machinations of the characters. However, as the story continues, the fantasy elements ramp up until the focus shifts away from the political maneuvering to epic battles. Again, overshadowing the story with magical forces, and it completely diminishes the complexity and the nuance of the political plot. An example of this pitfall is in S.A. Chakravarty's series, the Davabad trilogy, which begins with the City of Brass. It introduces Nahari, a con artist in 18th century Cairo with mysterious healing abilities. After summoning a powerful Djinn warrior, Dara, Nahari is thrust into the magical city of Davabad. This city is a melting pot of various Djinn tribes with deep-seated political tensions and historical grudges. The first book focuses on Nahari navigating the complex political landscape, forming alliances and uncovering secrets about her heritage. The heart of the story lies in the political machinations of Davabad's ruling class, including the Kwantani family and the oppressed Shafti population, half human, half Djinn. The book delves into themes of power, prejudice, and cultural conflict, with magic serving as a backdrop that enhances the story rather than being the focal point. But by the time we reach Empire of Gold, which is book 3, the stakes have escalated through the roof. Davabad is in ruins. Nahari, along with the allies Ali and Dara, must confront powerful magical adversaries to reclaim the city. The focus shifts heavily towards epic magical battles, the use of powerful artifacts, and the struggle against seemingly insurmountable magical forces. The intricate plotting of the first book is largely overshadowed by the urgent need to defeat powerful magical enemies. While the political element remains, it is very much pushed into the background by the grand magical confrontation and the quest to restore order through overwhelming political power. So that's the pitfall. And I can already hear you saying, But Marie, we write fantasy. How could you fix such a problem where you have too much fantasy? Well, one way to maintain the balance between escalating fantasy elements and political intrigue is to establish the fantasy threat up front and consistently weave it into the political narrative. A great example of using this is in the Witcher series by Andrzej Sapkowski. The books, not the TV series. The book series introduces a world teeming with magical creatures and sorcery, but it never loses sight of the political complexities. The threat of the Wild Hunt, a group of spectral riders, and the prophecies surrounding Ciri are established early in the series. These fantasy elements provide a looming threat that affects the political decisions and alliances throughout the series. Geralt, the main character, navigates a web of political intrigue involving various kingdoms, sorcerers, and non-human races. The fantasy elements are always present, but they serve to heighten the political stakes rather than overshadow them. Okay, so that's if you interweave the stakes up front. But what if you want to start with lower stakes and less fantasy, like the City of Brass does? Well, George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series, again book, not TV, gives you a blueprint for that. He introduces the threat of the others right in the start in a really good use of a prologue, and then transitions to the political machinations on the southern side of the wall. While the political machinations of the various factions play out in the foreground, the existential threat of the White Walkers or the others looms over the entire series, and the reader knows it's looming. It doesn't come as a surprise. So while there isn't that much fantasy down south, there isn't an unexpected sprawl of fantasy. The reader knows there's a fantasy threat coming. I tried to do a similar thing with my epic fantasy series Sangwheel Chronicles by introducing the threat of the Bloodgate early, so the reader knows that there is a high fantasy threat in between all of the assassinations and other political shenanigans. I don't know if I succeeded, my readers will be the judge of that, and you can check out the books and let me know in the links down below. Anyway, enough of that. By integrating the fantasy threat from the beginning, or having the fantasy involved from the beginning like Sapkowski, you can keep the political narrative compelling and ensure that the magical elements enhance rather than detract from the story's depth. So, to avoid fantasy sprawl, ensure that your political intrigue remains central to the plot, even as the fantasy elements escalate. Introduce your magical threats early and let them influence, but not overshadow, the political dynamics. Next, let's explore another common pitfall: lack of realism in political structures. Many fantasy authors fail to create believable political systems, often defaulting to an oversimplified monarchic model. This reliance on a single ruler's legitimacy to resolve all issues ignores the institutional structures and power dynamics that would realistically maintain societal order. Additionally, they often depict political collapse following the death of a single ruler, completely ignoring the complex web of alliances and institutions that support the monarchy. So first, let's talk about monarchies and the problem with the way fantasy authors implement them. In many fantasy stories, the default governance model is a monarchy, idealizing the concept of the rightful heir and that person restoring order. This approach not only puts too much focus on monarchy as the ruling system, but also infantilizes the system of monarchy. Historically, monarchies involved intricate alliances, and the king's authority was often limited by the power of his nobles. How the heck else do you think Europe had so many changes of kings during the medieval era? But this complexity is often completely ignored. For example, C.S. Lewis' The Chronicles of Narnia uses the trope of the rightful heir restoring order, not once, not twice, but 3 times. In The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, the 4 Pevensie children become the rightful monarchs. In Prince Caspian, Caspian reclaims his throne from his usurping uncle. And later, in The Silver Chair, Caspian's son must be rescued as the rightful heir has been kidnapped. Now, while Narnia is a children's book and its purpose is to serve as a metaphor for Christianity, this repetitive reliance on the rightful heir trope oversimplifies political conflict to find the true heir and put them on the throne and all of your problems are solved. In contrast, George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series offer a much more nuanced take. Martin presents various forms of government beyond monarchies, such as the slave masters, the free cities, the Dothraki Khals. And even within the 7 kingdoms, he does not infantilize monarchy. There are complex arguments about who should sit on the throne. Renly Baratheon makes a strong play for the throne, despite having no real right to it, while Stannis Baratheon, though the closest blood heir to Robert, lacks support. And of course, this whole situation is further complexified by the fact that Robert Baratheon seized the throne by might of arms, and really Dany or Jon Snow is the true rightful heir, if you will. This nuanced portrayal of the claims to the throne based on a mix of blood, right, and might is far more accurate and engaging to the reader. But this lack of realism extends beyond monarchies. In many fantasy stories, political struggles are simplified to a simple governance model, like an evil dictatorship, without exploring the complexities and checks on power present in real-world systems. Even absolute rulers need structures around them to maintain their power. Orders must be carried out by others who may influence the information and decisions in various ways. Ignoring these complexities can make the political landscape of a fantasy world feel shallow and unconvincing. It misses the opportunity to explore how different political institutions function, how power is negotiated, and how various stakeholders influence governance. For instance, the Eragon series by Christopher Paolini often simplifies political struggles, leading to less convincing scenarios. Conflicts are frequently resolved through straightforward battles and the restoration of the rightful ruler without delving into the deeper institutional and social structures that underpin governance. And I know, he was 16 when he wrote it, he's improved a lot, but it still serves as a great example. In contrast, Frank Herbert's Dune presents a detailed and believable political system. The universe of Dune is governed by an intricate web of political entities, including the Padishah Emperor, the noble houses, the Spacing Guild, the Bene Gesserit, and of course, there's the involvement of the company and how it functions. Each entity has its own power structures and interests, leading to a complex interplay of politics. Killing the emperor would not collapse the system, but it would trigger a succession struggle, demonstrating the robustness of the political institutions. So how do you avoid this pitfall? Think beyond a single ruler and consider the structures that uphold the government. Who gathers the information and what are their goals? Which factions exist within the court and what are their agendas? Who carries out the orders and what are their interests? Understanding these dynamics can add depth to your story. And if you need help in creating a bureaucracy for your government, check out my video on that topic in the information card. Also, consider incorporating different forms of governance, such as theocratic governance, merchant republics, or ancient Greek-style democracies in your world. These systems can provide the nuance your political narrative needs. And if you need inspiration on the various types of governments, check out the first video in this series, which covers a range of governmental systems in the iceberg format. By embracing the complexities of political systems and avoiding oversimplified models, you can create richer, more engaging political fantasy narratives and avoid the tired old trope I highlighted in the opening skit of this video. What do you think of my comparison? Would you have used different authors? Or would you speak in the defense of a simple political system? Let me know in the comments below. And let's move on to Pitfall 3, Binary Narratives. Simplifying political conflicts to a binary struggle, generally good versus evil, strips away the complexity of characters' motivation and the grey areas of political maneuvering. When villains are portrayed as purely evil and heroes as purely good, it eliminates the moral ambiguity and ethical dilemmas that make political fantasy engaging. The same applies to factions. If you show one faction as purely evil and the other as purely good, not only does this lower the stakes, but it also makes the story ridiculously unengaging, because the reader knows, 100% knows, who is going to be left standing in the end. I have discussed this also in my video on factions, which you can check out in the information card. Anyway, this reductionist approach results in flat, one-dimensional characters and predictable plots. It fails to capture the essence of political intrigue, where characters often operate within shades of grey, driven by personal ambitions, ideological beliefs, and practical necessities. A prime example of this pitfall can be seen in Terry Goodkind's later books in the Sword of Truth series. These books heavily allegorize communism, with the protagonists representing freedom and individualism and moral righteousness, while the antagonists are depicted as evil, oppressive, and embodying the worst aspects of collectivist ideology. The imperial order in these books is presented as a monolithic villainous entity driven by a desire for control and suppression of individual freedom. This portrayal creates a simplistic and often heavy-handed dichotomy between good and evil, stripping the narrative of the rich complexity that had the potential to exist. For example, in Faith of the Fallen, the protagonist, Richard Rahl, struggles against the imperial order, and this is depicted as a battle between the inherently good values of freedom and capitalism versus the inherently evil values of collectivism and control. This stark division leaves little room for nuanced exploration of the character's motivations or the socio-political landscape. The story reduces complex political and ideological conflict to a straightforward clash between absolute good and absolute evil, which honestly feels both preachy and lacks the depth needed to fully engage readers in a political fantasy. In contrast, in The Shadow of the App by Adrian Tchaikovsky, we are at first presented with what looks like a monolithic evil empire, the Wasps, who are dead set on expanding their territory, and Major Thalric is certainly presented as a bad guy of note. And I mean of note. But as the series unfolds, and I'm not done with the Shadows of the App yet, but even where I am now, this is true, we get sympathetic elements of the Wasp Empire. Some of our good characters turn evil, and even Thalric becomes a more nuanced grey character. Though still, I'm not sure how someone with his past can ever be fully redeemed. We'll see when I'm done. This makes for a much more engaging narrative, and one where I'm not 100% sure where the story is going to end and who will be left standing of the characters. And that uncertainty keeps me invested in reading, book after book in a 10-book saga. So, avoid reducing your narrative to two simplistic sides. Give the characters flaws, moral grey areas, and temptations they struggle against. And do the same for your factions. No group of people are wholly good or wholly evil, and reducing your factions to this really just limits your plot. And speaking of characters reduced to caricatures, let's talk about Pitfall 4, prioritizing world building over character development. This is going to sound odd coming from me. After all, I run a whole channel dedicated to world building. But characters drive stories, and this is especially true in politics. A very common pitfall in fantasy politics is prioritizing intricate world building at the expense of character development. While creating a rich, immersive world is essential, I just spent a large part of this video saying how important it is, that world building should not overshadow the development of compelling, relatable characters. Readers connect with stories through characters, and no matter how fascinating or detailed your governmental system, it will fall flat if the characters inhabiting it are not well developed. But it is easy to get caught up in the details of your world, especially the complexities required for compelling political fantasy, and then neglect to flesh out the characters that drive the story. As a result, characters can become mere vehicles for exploring the world, rather than individuals with their own arcs, motivations, and growth. I call this sightseeing writing. Look to my left, you see my magnificent mountain, and look to my right, my wonderful government, and the character is basically just a tour guide. Readers may admire the complexity of this world, but without strong characters to invest in, they struggle to care about the plot and its outcome. The story feels distant and impersonal, failing to evoke the emotional responses that make for a memorable reading experience. An example of this, and fight me in the comments if you must, is in the later books of the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. There is a noticeable shift toward extensive world building and description, sometimes at the expense of the characters' arcs in the middle books. For example, characters like Perrin and Matt, who were central and well developed in the earlier books, find their arcs slowing down to a crawl. Perrin's search for Fail and Matt's adventures with the Band of the Red Hand and Tuan are drawn out over several books with less focus on their internal development. This, to me anyway, led to a sense of stagnation, as though those characters are just tour guides to that aspect of the world. And while the world of the Wheel of Time is incredibly detailed and rich, this focus on world building in the middle books diluted the emotional impact of the story and the growth of these characters. In contrast, Robin Hobb's Live Ship Traders trilogy is a prime example of balancing world building with character development. The world of Bingtown and the Rain Wilds is richly detailed and immersive, but it is the complex, intertwined personal journey of characters like Althea Vestrit, Wintrow Vestrit, and the sentient live ship Vivica that drive the narrative. Hobb's deep exploration of these characters' thoughts, emotions, and growth ensures that readers are invested in their stories, even as they are drawn into the broader, richly constructed world. Similarly, Jacqueline Carey's Cashil's Legacy series expertly balances an intricately detailed world with profound character development. The world of Terra d'Ange is luscious and vivid. The world building is deep, delving into politics, religion, and history. But it is Phèdre No Delaunay's complex character, her personal struggles, and her growth that captivate readers. and Carey's ability to weave Phaedra's emotional journey with the politics and cultural intricacies of her world makes for a compelling and immersive narrative. So what do we, world builders extraordinaire, learn from this? Well, ensure that your characters are the heart of your story. Develop detailed backstories, motivations, and arcs for your main characters. Let their personal journeys drive the plot forward, with world building serving to enhance and contextualize their experiences, rather than overshadowing them. Chaos Cat is now on the mirror in the bathroom, so the book should once again be safe. If you've enjoyed the video so far, give it a thumbs up, and let's move on to the final pitfall: why ending political fantasies is really hard. Ending a political fantasy can be extremely challenging because a well-rounded political narrative often involves characters on both sides of the conflict, the so-called good and evil sides. And firstly, your readers might become attached to the losing side, making the ending feel like a tragedy to them. But the deeper reason, even if you don't show the evil side, why ending political fantasy is difficult, lies in the limited number of satisfying conclusions. Basically, a political fantasy has 3 endings. Characters either die, resulting in a tragedy, which is super hard to write, or they uphold a flawed system, resulting in stories that show no political change, leaving the reader going, okay, but why did I read this if literally nothing changes? Or the characters establish a new system, and while this might sound like the best one, this is often done without showing the complexities of the transition. And it is the ending that I want to focus on. The transitional arc from one political system to another is most times oversimplified, presenting the new political system as a perfect solution. This lack of realistic resolution can result in unsatisfying endings that fail to address the complexities introduced throughout the series. After spending the entire series exploring shades of grey in politics, an abrupt shift to a seemingly perfect system feels unrealistic and jarring, undermining the intricate narratives that have been built. A great example of exactly this is Game of Thrones, the TV series. The final season just kills off everyone with a vague claim to the throne, has Sansa declare independence, Jon yeet himself out of there, and then Bran is elected to the throne. Like, I'm sorry, what? Although by the time that episode hit, I was so disillusioned by the series, my reaction was, sure, this is a thing which might as well happen. This sudden resolution disregarded the complex political dynamics developed over the previous seasons, and it pretty much wrecked all the joy people had left in the show. The resolution felt unearned and undermined the series' prior exploration of political intricacies. But there are people who say that there is no way to end such a series with satisfaction, and to them I say, you are wrong. An example of a well-executed ending is in the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. Sanderson provides nuanced endings that address the complexities of the political system and the characters' roles within it. Furthermore, in the continuing series in that world, he explores how the new systems that replace the old ones have their own pitfalls and downsides, highlighting that there is no such thing as a perfect system. So, how can you be more Sanderson and less Dan and Dave? First, have some respect for your fans. Sorry. Anyway, how do you really avoid this pitfall? 1. Acknowledge the complexity. If you are not going to show the detailed transition to a new form of government, acknowledge the ongoing complexity. Leave the reader with a sense that tomorrow a new dawn will rise, and with it a new form of government. We will begin the hard work of rebuilding our society, aware that we will make a new set of mistakes, but hopeful that we have learned from the past. Something like that. Probably not quite so pompous. 2, leave room for growth. Wrap up with a sense of continuity and growth. Instead of presenting the new system as the perfect solution, show that it is just the beginning of another chapter in society's evolution. This approach maintains the narrative's realism and depth. And 3, focus on character resolutions. Ensure that your main characters have satisfying personal arcs. Their growth and changes should feel complete, even if the political landscape remains in flux. Basically, ensure your character growth arcs are completed and the reader feels satisfied in them, even if you can never complete a political transition. One of the greatest disservices Dan and Dave did was Jamie's growth arc went from growing straight back to Cersei, and all of that growth lost. Dany's growth arc went from learning to be a good ruler, being a Disney princess with John on the dragons, completely insane. Like, it was a nutso arc. Cersei's arc went nowhere, Jon's arc went nowhere, Tyrion went from a really good character to stupid as mud. It was a tragedy. They basically wrapped up nobody's growth arcs. And it was extremely insulting as a fan to have walked through this journey with these characters, and then it's just suddenly, oh, well, no, none of that matters. I'm just going to park these characters where I need them to be so that I can hit this plot point. That season annoys me. Anyway, moving on. By doing these things, making sure that you provide satisfying growth arcs, making sure that you leave the sense that there is growth to come, and making sure that it is clear that this is not a perfect system that they're now going into, you can craft a far more compelling ending to your fantasy saga. And those are my thoughts on the 5 biggest pitfalls in political fantasy. I hope you've enjoyed this episode and the series. I'll be running a poll in a month or 2 to pick my new big series. I just need a couple of weeks to relax and make some other videos. So make sure you're subscribed so you can vote on that poll. And as always, this series is brought to you by the wonderful members of my channel, like Tony, Katie, Dylan, and Tiffany, who are the courtiers that prop up my work. And if you would like to join their supportive ranks and get early access to my videos, along with all of these other cool perks, hit the big join button down below. But please don't feel pressured to support my channel financially. You can also support the channel just by watching another video. And since you enjoyed this one enough to stick around to the end, you might consider watching my video on the 4 mistakes fantasy authors make in writing love stories. Or you could trust the algorithm's recommendation, and I will see you soon for another episode from Just in Time Worlds, where we build what we need when we need it. She very much wants to be here and wants me to pay attention to her and not to you guys. So she will now replace my book display. Okay, let's get back to this. And all she actually wanted was pets. As chaotic as Richard Roll himself, I swear.